This is Joe Augustine, a child from the 70's. Mr. Augustine, can you tell us what you remember about the Vietnam War?
Vietnam War is about the first thing I remember really well in the 70s. My dad was in Vietnam, and at the end, about 1975, they had to evacuate all of the Vietnamese people that had helped our country during that war because the communists were coming down from the north. And it was a big deal. They used helicopters, airplanes, private boats, and these people streamed into like our aircraft carriers and ships offshore, and they brought them to the United States. And it was a big thing. It was on the news every night, and like people all over the country would adopt these Vietnamese families and help them get settled into American life. So in our neighborhood, one of our neighbors had adopted a family, and was people all the way from infants to 70 and 80 years old. And it was just fun because you got to meet people from a different culture. They didn't speak English at first, but it didn't seem to matter. I remember that I think I was in like fourth grade, and we were getting a kid, his name was Kong Do, into our class, and our teacher was telling us, oh, you have to be very careful about what you say. It's going to be real culture shock. And this kid comes into class, doesn't speak a word of English, and he's like the coolest kid in the school, right? I went to school with him through high school. And it was something you saw all over the States. We saw it a lot where I was from. And I think it's one of those stories that nobody talks about today. You just don't remember it, but it's one of the first big stories I remember.
And what about the technology of the 70's? Anything really stand out to you?
What's funny is we had all the same stuff you have today. It's just like we had the first version of it. So the first thing I remember is my first video game. And it really was like the first video game. It was Pong. And you hooked it to a TV set, and you had two paddles and a ball. And then a couple years later, we got the Atari 2600, which wasn't much better, but it was in color. And we thought it was the greatest thing in the world. Look that up on YouTube, and like you can see how lame it looks today. We had portable TVs that were about this big, and they started to have cell phones, which were about this big. Sometimes they came in a bag. It was, we thought that you just couldn't get any better than what we had. The Walkman. It was a cassette player, bigger than iPhone. It had headphones. It was pretty lame, but it's what we had.